mythos. A quick plug here for By Force Alone, now available in paperback. And The Hood, guess what that's about? Coming soon this October. Okay, so that's Lavie. And next I'm going to move on to Lauren Beukes, who is joining us from Cape Town. Lauren is the author of The Green in this anthology, which invites us to suit up and step into the xenoflora, all the way up to our armor-plated oxters. Soup punk so ought to be a thing, particularly when it's cross-fertilized with slime molds and zombies. Lauren, it's wonderful to see you again. I think this is 10 years ago, to the very night that you won the Arthur C. Clarke for Zoo City.
Yeah, it is. And also Freedom Day in South Africa, in which we commemorate the day of the first free elections. So it's a very good day.
Happy Freedom Day, everybody.
Happy Freedom Day.
I was there.
Yeah.
You get around, Lavie.
Yeah, we were both there, but only one of us won. Next up, we have Francesco Verso, whose short story, The Green Ship, takes a decommissioned aircraft carrier as a seed and 3D prints a brave new micronation in the Indian Ocean. Now, Francesco is actually probably by far the most qualified world SF luminary on this panel: author, editor, publisher, visionary, and we look very much forward to hearing what he has to say. Next up, we have Taiyo Fujii, who has just joined us from tomorrow morning, I believe, in Tokyo.
Yes.
And Taiyo has written Prayer, which is really where a reconnaissance operative answers a killer robot's prayers, I think is probably a quick way of synopsizing it. Taiyo, of course, was a pioneer of digital serials and a luminary of the golden age of Kindle publishing in Japan. So I think it'd be very interesting to ask him some questions about, access to world markets through digital forms. And
you forgot to mention Taiyo is just nominated for 2 Staying Awards that have just been announced.
Oh, wow, congratulations.
Nominated? Yes. This year, this year I got 2 nominations for the same year. So same hour in Japan.
It's amazing.
So happy.
yeah, and Lavie, I believe that you had some news as well on the nominations front.
Yes.
Can't keep up.
With on the Chinese nebula.
Oh yes, I did win the Chinese Nebula. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Congrats.
Lavie tells me that they know him as the science fiction ghost in China, which we can interrogate him about great length later on.
Moving on, Nick. Moving on.
Moving on. We have Rsa Rsa Garcia, who is joining us from the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago, where I hope it's a sunny afternoon.
Too sunny. It's incredibly hot these days.
Fantastic. And her story, The Sun from Both Sides, has a quiet opening, I think, that belies the complexity of its end game. It takes us from the cottage in the woods into an interstellar diaspora, luscious xenobiology, sisterly starships, and chess as life and death.
Oh, wow. I should hire you to do my blooms. That's amazing.
Well, when you've got good material to work with, you just can't go wrong.
I'm beginning to think you actually read the book, Nick, which...
I wouldn't want to give that impression. No, occasionally publishers do read books. We try not to. It does get in the way, but I'm too much of a science fiction fan to avoid that. Right. before we start talking, I'll just say that we will be taking some questions from the audience. So do post them into the Q&A channel. Vote them up. And as we go through, we can start putting them to the panelists. Okay. Question one. In his introduction, Lavie says that there's a vibrant new generation of writers from across the globe who are changing the face of the genre one story at a time. So I'm going to ask the panel about the state of the science fiction art in their respective country and where they see themselves fit in and what they're excited about. Lauren, would you like to go first?
So there are so many up and coming amazing South African authors, some of whom are starting to break out into the international market, which of course is how you actually make a living out of writing. Mahali Mashiko is just absolutely phenomenal. She won the University of Johannesburg Prize for her novel, The Yearning. And once I finish chatting, I'll put it all in the text chat so people can like get those names and go and look them up. But her short story collection Intruders is absolutely phenomenal, and it puts a very kind of South African spin with folklore and mythology on classic tropes like zombies or demon hunters or science fiction or aliens. And her work is so exciting. She's also just done some work on Black Panther, and she's got a whole new Marvel character coming out who I think is a variation of Captain America. So she's really breaking out, and she's absolutely fantastic. Masanda Nshanga is also doing really well with his novel, The Triangulum, which is, I think Lavie will like it. It's a very tricky, like dense, like incredibly sophisticated, smart book, just absolutely fascinating. I say that, Lavie, because I think you're a more complicated writer than I am. Who else? Oh, this wonderful young woman, Mia Adern, has written this really cool novel called Mermaid Phillips. It's actually on the long list for the Sunday Times Prize here. And it is about, instead of abalone poachers, which is a big thing in Cape Town, we have mermaid poachers who then sell fillet of mermaid for a massive amount of money. But it's also about gender-based violence. It's also about the Cape Ganglands. And as a young woman of color writing this, her voice is so fresh and so authentic and so exciting. So really interesting people coming out right now.
And I mean, you know, it was, I mean, yes, it's 10 years ago since you won the R.S.A. Do you think that, I mean, were you part of, you know, the wave that has made this possible?
So yeah, I think South African publishers were maybe more closed-minded. My publisher wasn't, but I think it definitely has opened the door for publishers to like look at science fiction and fantasy and be like, oh, there is actually a market for this, and we can tell those stories from here in a really authentic and interesting way. Whether that's actually made the difference about us being able to travel more internationally is, you know, a big question. You know, in South Africa, if you sell 1,000 copies, you're a bestseller, and you get such a small amount of money per book. It's like 10 Rand a book. So 10,000 Rand divided by 20, I don't know, 500 pounds. And that's something you spent a year or two working on. It's very difficult to be a writer in this country unless you manage to get those international deals. But more and more writers are, and that's really exciting. And there are white writers like Charlie Human and Sam Wilson who are doing very well and have got international deals, and maybe some movie rights picking up, which is cool. Yeah. And so, Francesco, I mean, you've done a lot of work in opening those doors, sort of internationally, haven't you? And you've obviously you've brought a lot of sort of international sort of fiction sort of into Italy. What's the domestic Italian science fiction scene like?
Well, traditionally, Italy has been producing a lot of fantastic, but not so much science fiction, standing with the standards of the global market. But we had amazing writers like Primo Levi and Italo Calvino and Lino Aldani lately, and Valerio Evangelista. It's just that the strength of the Anglophone science fiction as being, conquering our small land, our small country. But lately, with the development of internet and the social network and digital markets, and small presses have been managing to promote new voices. And well, I'm one of them, and I would like to mention, of course, Claudia Farlis, whose anthology I've managed to sell to a small press in the US called Rsa Publishing, and her book called Creative Surgery is really, really good, and has been translated by Rachel Cordasco and Jennifer Delaire. They did an amazing job because Claudia Farlis comes from Sardinia, which is a beautiful island, and she brings up all the tradition and also legends and mythologies mixed up with brand new technologies and climate change and a bit of solar punk and all these new concepts. So let's say that at the moment, the biggest problem, of course, is translation. And this is my long time mission to try to promote the idea that science fiction doesn't happen in one language, in one culture, in one economy, in one religion, in one single society, but it belongs to the world. So we should invest a lot more in giving more people the opportunity to be translated into other languages. And I don't mean English, because now English works as a lingua franca for all the world, but there are, very popular languages like Spanish or Chinese, which are spoken by the majority of the world, and they don't get the same recognition as in the English language. So let's say there is this anthology is really a milestone, because Lavie managed to translate some of the stories, which is really important, and I really thank you very much for that, both of you, of course. And I think there's now an opportunity, because the world science fiction is getting more popular and is getting more relevance also in the eyes of readers, and they now understand that science fiction, I mean, with the rising of innovation and technology all across the world, when a new iPhone or a new technology is out in Tokyo, is out also in Cape Town, and is out also in Rio de Janeiro, and in every country. So this way of democratization, it should be applied also to fiction, and in particular, of course, to science fiction. And so I think Italy is getting, back on track. There's still a long way to go, but I've managed to sell my books to US and UK and China, and trying to do my part to promote this kind of new way to look at science fiction, also from a local point of view.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, Rhonda, I mean, what role do you think, I mean, technology sort of played, in your role, in your authorial career? Because didn't you win you have an ebook prize amongst your laurels?
Yes, I was lucky enough to win the silver medal, the EP silver medal for best science fiction horror ebook when my novel Next Stallion is debuted. Technology, you would be surprised. My country is Trinidad and Tobago, so we're like 1.6 million, 2 islands, 1 nation, a whole lot of different ethnicities. And I mean, the Caribbean diaspora on the whole is a whole lot of different ethnicities. And we've actually adopted a great deal of technology, because we sort of model ourselves on the 2 great powers that affected the region, America and the UK. So in my country in particular, everything that's new, everything that comes out, everybody wants it. The newest iPhone, the latest computer, whatever. We're a very progressive nation. We in that respect, we're sort of different. Not all the islands are like that. Not all the islands are interested in adopting things like that. But we are a fast-paced nation, and because we have an oil-based economy, technology was always something that sort of lifted us up out of difficulties. Like, I grew up with the impression that things got better because we progressed. And that sort of fed into my interest in science fiction and technology and progress, but in a sort of social way, because to me, it wasn't just about what it is technology does for technology, but rather how technology affects us and makes our lives either better or different, or the unexpected things that happen alongside technology. So for Trinidad and Tobago, we've had a strong literary tradition in post-colonial and colonial and contemporary literature. But it wasn't that strong in the genre in that sense, even though one of the first best-selling authors from the region was Guyanese, and Edgar Mittelholzer was actually a bestseller because he sold supernatural and paranormal Gothic novels in Europe. You know, we didn't have a lot of movement on that front across the region for some time. But when I was a teenager in school, I came across this novel called Midnight Rubber, which was written by Nalo Hopkinson. And she is from the region, Canadian, Caribbean. And the novel blew my mind. I did not realize that you could write yourself into the future, that a technological, progressive future would also include people like me, people from anywhere. I had gotten the message, you know, that the future could be diverse from Star Trek, which was one of my favorite shows, but it hadn't really hit home that that diversity extended to myself. You know, there was this sort of free-floating idea that progress came from outside of our country, that we didn't really have anything to offer ourselves because we couldn't possibly be as sophisticated or be at the cutting edge of things. Never mind the fact that our minds were just as good as anybody else's. You know, there was just this pervasive feeling that you didn't look the right way. You didn't come from the right place. You couldn't possibly have anything useful or interesting to say about it. And when I read Midnight Rubber, which was built around our carnival season, which is so important to our social activity and to our society as a whole, because it's tied to religion as well as our social calendar. And she built out this world where you had Calypso as the mathematical basis for how we build our AIs and how we travel through space. And I was like, what the heck? You mean there are things that we already do that could be relevant to the future? And from that moment on, I knew what I was going to do. I was going to write science fiction. I was going to write speculative fiction. And I wanted to, initially I was afraid almost to write myself into it because I didn't see anybody else doing that. And then I was like, you know what? Nalo's doing it. Every American author is doing it. Every British author is doing it. Everybody writes from who they are and where they came from. And I decided, well, if I'm not seeing it around me, maybe I need to go ahead and try and write it myself. And, I've been lucky enough that I got the opportunity to join up with workshops and meet really great friends, make really good friends, meet really great people. And I started seeing around me as more and more of the world came in through our television and through our phones and our laptops. I started seeing things like anime get really popular. We started having anime conventions. And then the next thing you know, we had the Lit Bucus Fest, which started awarding prizes and gathering writers from around the region. It actually just ended here, you know? And going to the Lit Bucus Fest inspired me so much, meeting other writers like Karen Lord and Tobias Bakel. And these are all Caribbean, well, Karen's Bajan, always has been, like me, she's always been here. Then you meet people like Tobias, who's diaspora, Caribbean diaspora, you know, and I made friends like Susan Palumbo, who's doing horror from Canada, but she's also Trinidadian heritage. And then you find out people like Peter Jelly Clark has Trinidadian heritage, and Evan Winter, who just started writing an amazing fantasy series with Raise Up Dragons. And it just kept inspiring me to push harder and push bigger and not worry too much about what I wasn't seeing out there, because I could do it in here. I could do it for myself. I could bring that scene home. And what I'm seeing in the world now is that the result of that welcoming and that mixing is that we are seeing more diversity in science fiction. We're seeing more diversity in fantasy. We're seeing baby steps toward acknowledging that there's a whole world outside of, you know, the big three. I always think of it, Australia, the UK, and the US, you know, where people are thinking and striving and applying their thoughts to technology and progress and humanity and how we're going to change. For me, I always say that science fiction is the study of humanity in extraordinary circumstances. And that has really guided the way I approach science fiction and the way that I approach technology and how I look at technology in my writing. I am always interested in how we can get these things to work. And I have so much respect for hard science people who work hard at figuring out how this could be derived from today's knowledge of science. But there's a part of me that really loves the idea of what we don't know yet, what we haven't accepted yet, what we haven't discovered yet, what we're still figuring out. And that's, I think, where I write a lot of my stories from, is that intersection between what we don't know and what we might discover, and what we already know, and how that changes us.
Yeah, well, that's, you know, that's what drives us all, you know, when in our science fictional reading. Taiyo, we talked briefly, Rhonda briefly mentioned, you know, the effect of, you know, sort of anime arriving, you know, in the Caribbean, and that's obviously, you know, a large part of sort of Japan's sort of export of certainly a lot of it is science fiction. But I mean, I for one certainly know a lot less, you know, about, you know, the more, you know, normal science fiction between two covers of a normal paperback book. I mean, what's the actual, just the words alone scene like in Japan?
Okay, then unfortunately, the big anime fan group and the science fiction writers team was separated from the 1980s years in Japan, because the many science fiction writers are keen to the writing the good literature rather than the entertainment. Then the group having separated, but in these 10 years, then science fiction writers do not hesitate to touching the animation features, the themes onto our work. Then in these years, many science fiction writers started to write a script for the Japanese animation. The Seiyun Award writer To Enjo started the series of the Godzilla animation series in the Netflix, and Urobuchi Gen, the Japanese very famous science fiction animation script, publishes several novels on the text. Then in this year, the Japanese science fiction scene and animation is fortunately engaging again. But basically, the Japanese animation was started by the Osamu Tezuka in 1960 years. It is very earlier years, and the Osamu Tezuka was joined. Osamu Tezuka was very respected. Osamu Tezuka was respected by science fiction writers, and science fiction writers respected Osamu Tezuka both, and Osamu Tezuka produces tons of the science fiction animation, and he started the mind of the science fiction animation is then Osamu Tezuka and his follower make the tons of the science fiction animation, science fiction mangas, and in Japan the lot of the themes was talked and written in the animation or manga already before the novel and before the literature touches it. Then in Japan, the manga and anime is so huge in our narrative world. Then we cannot we cannot ignore the animation, and we are watching and reading, watching animation and reading manga and writing it. Then the literature is a subgenre of the Japanese narratives. It is a scene. And the animation manga have the half of the many animation manga that produces the science fiction. Then the Japanese, then you have the big opportunity for the bringing the science fiction ideas. We don't have the allergy for the science fiction ideas.
Yeah. No, that's
Manga is huge here too. It was a huge influence on me.
Lavie, it seems a good time to ask you an audience question from Christina, who I believe is included in. But we have her question is what was the most difficult thing about putting together an anthology like the Best of World SF? I mean, we've seen that there are vibrant SF scenes all around the planet. How did you get, your pipeline to them so that you could scoop up the best? And is this something that you could only have done now, or is it something that is has always been there if you went looking?
Well, I mean, to sound not wanting to sound like a broken record, the biggest problem with doing this anthology was getting someone to publish it. I was like, there's the anthology, it's waiting for anyone to take it. Yeah, I mean, it was partly because I travel a lot, or I used to travel before I was locked up on this island for the past year. And actually, one of the things that really prompted me to start with all of this, obviously I grew up on a kibbutz in Israel, so English is my second language. And you never saw someone from a kibbutz in Israel on Mars, other than Philip K. Dick. I think he was the only writer who, for some reason, kept writing us into the books. It was completely random. So I traveled a lot, and actually I was in China in 2000. I kind of traveled, I backpacked over to China through Russia and Mongolia. And we didn't even have the internet back then. There was like one email address for a guy called Wu Yan. I mean, Francesco's heard me tell this story. And I emailed him. I said, look, I'm coming to China. I'm just a guy, but I like science fiction. He was like, yes, come and meet me. I mean, China, like people have seen Beijing now. It doesn't look anything like it did 20 years ago. And we met up, really got along. And I got invited to Chengdu on those slow trains that used to take 3 days, which again are gone. The whole place is gone. Chengdu, I think, is completely changed. And I got to meet everyone in China who was into science fiction at the time, including a guy called Liu Xixin, who was this young kid who just published a short story, and they were giving him a prize. Never really expected him to win a Hugo 20 years later or anything. But I was very touched by the hospitality and by how much you have in common with people from everywhere because of that shared interest. And so one of the things that motivated me was just, by wanting to give back, wanting to do something for all the people who are like me, who don't have that voice on the world stage. And don't forget, at that time, we didn't have a voice on the world stage. No one was publishing our stories, I mean, you were submitting stories and getting them rejected, and no one was interested. So I literally kind of put together the first small press anthology I did out of, I said that in the introduction, it's made out of spit and shoe polish and buttons. It was like, what can I get? And I'd pick up, I picked up horror collections and comics in Malaysia, for example. I translated one of the stories from Hebrew myself because there weren't any stories from Hebrew. And I got translations from China. And this is before Ken Liu started doing translations and all that sort of stuff. So I would get these very rough translations that the authors sort of did, and I would try and almost rewrite them into something that was readable. And that's how I got to publish the first Hung Song story in English. which I'm still my claim to fame. You know, I got to publish Unsung in English for the first time. But that's kind of how it was. But to actually put it together now is a completely different story, because there's so much stuff. There's the scene has changed completely, but publishing hasn't changed. So I was still knocking on doors, and I'm sure you've heard me complain about it, and I was still pitching these.
Are you suggesting that publishing's behind the times?
No one would ever suggest such a thing. But I still took it personally, Nick. I mean, I still took it very personally. But when it came to doing this particular anthology, it was very easy to do. The one thing that surprised me was I started by making a list of the stories that I like, you know, that kind of, and it turned out that that was an anthology that exactly one person would buy, which was me. It was basically all the weird stories that don't fit into anything, and I'm not, and I thought, right, no, you can't do that. This is supposed to be like a proper anthology. And I wanted to do more of a science fiction anthology. You know, I consider fantasy and horror and all the rest of it's all the same to me, but I wanted it to have that robots and spaceships element to it and just kind of focus a little bit more. So that kind of changed the way I was thinking. But as you saw, I still snuck in some of the weirder stories. You know, I talk about it in the book, but stories like Ekaterina Sedia's The Bank of Burkina Faso, which I just love that story. And it came from when she was trying to submit it to the English magazines, no one would publish this story. And I just swore that if I ever got the chance, I would publish the story. So I got to do that. So it's very much motivated by, you know, motivated by just trying to do something just because everyone keeps telling you can't do it.
But I mean, that's one of the interesting things about science fiction. I think that, as you know, I think, Rhonda, it was on your website that I saw a little quote in your bio saying that you'd pursued a career in speculative fiction against the advice of all of your English teachers. And I thought, yeah, you know, I can't remember any teachers who said, you know, like, you odd little child, you might quite like this kind of stuff, go away and read it. I sort of remember quite the opposite, being told not to read it. Otherwise, you know, you would turn out to be even stranger than you possibly already were. And if you were reading it, you know, you were told that, you know, that you're only looking at this particular part of the book. I remember at university reading, I think it was The Bridge. They were doing a reading of The Bridge, and, you know, they weren't interested in any of the fantastic bits. You know, look, ignore those. You can skip through those. You know, just throw half that novel away. But it seems to me that, you know, there is an audience of people out there who've always liked the strange and the unusual and want to be challenged and want to be taken to different places. And so, why on earth, you know, is there's resistance, this perceived resistance, you know, within publishing, within science fiction publishing, saying that people basically only want the same thing served up again and again and again. And what is it that's changed that now? Why is it changing? Is it the internet? Is it the free distribution of stories? Is it because the gatekeepers basically are being bypassed?
Yes, I think that's definitely part of it. I do think that the internet helped pull down a great deal of the gatekeeping ability that had been so tightly enforced in the previous decades. Because once the internet opened things up for people to see what was out there, it became more difficult to believe the claim that, you know, people don't want these kinds of stories. People don't want to spend money on these kinds of things. At the end of it all, I mean, when it comes to entertainment, money is the biggest motivator. And once there was evidence that people were willing to not only enjoy these things, but pay for it, you know, there was suddenly some interest in that. But not only that, I think audiences who had not seen this kind of storytelling before, or seen these kinds of characters, or seen these kinds of imaginations, were suddenly like, why don't we have more of this? You know, I know all these other things. Because the reality is that there's so much storytelling in other cultures that don't tell stories the same way that you would tell stories in, say, Western society. And so it comes across much pressure for the audience. It comes across as something new that you, and like you said, a lot of people do in fact enjoy the new or the strange or the unusual. No matter how many times we are told that we should really, you know, focus on real life and bring yourself down to earth. I'm from a West Indian society. Our parents all want us to come out with good jobs, you know. The arts are like, no. They don't pay you enough. No. You can't be sure to eat and drink off of that. Yeah. Put that aside and have a real job. You know, that's basically where all that impetus came from. Not because they didn't like those things, but because they didn't see them as a career path. And even now in my part of the world, there's no publishing industry to speak of it. Everybody that is in my community has had to be published outside of the region, you know. And I hope one day that changes, but I'm seeing baby steps toward that. I'm seeing baby steps toward trying to set up a Caribbean science fiction scene, you know, and drill down into that, into maybe a Trinidadian or a Barbadian or a St. Lucian science fiction scene. And we're all trying to come together and figure out how to do this right now. It's a time of tremendous energy and change and options. And we're trying to figure it all out. And I'm just really grateful to be part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know the question of scenes is quite interesting. I mean, there's a question here on the in the chat, which is asking if we know about Andean futurism, the equivalent of Afrofuturism, but in South America.
I know the writer Mariana Enriquez, who's Argentinian, is doing some really interesting, I don't know if I call it science fiction, but definitely like high genre. And I think there's some really interesting stuff coming out of the area. Unfortunately, I just don't know enough about it because, again, we come up against that problem of who's going to publish it, who's going to translate it, who's going to pay for it. I think readers will certainly pay for it, but we need the middlemen to like bring us the stories, unfortunately. But I'd love to hear more about kind of Andean futurism. And I know my friend Sofia Almaria writes really interesting Gulf futurism as a Qatari American. And, you know, I think there's so much space to hear so many different kinds of stories. But it is finding the market, it is finding a way to get it out to readers, which is why it's so great to have an anthology like this, you know, especially as kind of it's like a tasting course, right? You know, you get to like taste all these different like writers and yeah.
Yeah, no, that's very much the idea. I mean, rather like Lavie, I mean, who was putting together an anthology basically based on stuff that only he liked. I mean, that's very much been the story of my publishing career, and hoping that there are a few similarly demented people out there. And thankfully, you know, so far it's been proved that there are. So, I mean, given that we're talking about tasting courses, there's another great question here from Liam, which is if language was no barrier, which country or culture that you have not yet read an SF novel from would you be most interested in reading?
Oh, I would definitely want to read more from the Middle East. I have a really good friend, Sameem Siddiqui, he's Pakistani American, and he wrote this amazing story called Air Body that, you know, has gotten some advanced praise and so on last year. And I would love to see what societies that are not as secular as mine see as technology's place and how they see technology affecting them going forward. I would love to see what Islam thinks speculative fiction, science fiction future looks like for them. You know, that's really interesting to me. And Latin America, of course, because they're right next door.
Francesco.
Oh, well, now this is the main reason why I start a future fiction. We don't want barriers, so we translate from 11 languages. And basically I read what I want because we translate from Chinese, Russian, Portuguese, Spanish, Polish, French, German, Greek, Turkish, and yeah, just to, you know, that means we do the scouting. Oh, sorry, Taiyo, also Japanese soon. We do the scouting and that's really the reason. I mean, I want to read the best that is out there, and the best that is out there comes in different flavors. So I think we need really to think in a different way, because we've been, well, let me put it straight. We have to decolonize our imagination because it has been conquered by one industry and one way of looking at the future, especially. So this is exactly what I think. We need to decolonize the future. And when it comes to science fiction, we're starting to see emerging countries like China or even the Emirates sending out their stuff in the space. That's ending the monopoly of the space colonization. I don't like colonization in any way, but let's say in an imaginary way, we are trying to crush that monopoly, as an imagination. So it's really about going and doing it, because the cost of the translation is not so different as one might think. If you translate a book from English, as it happens in most of the countries, which are, getting books from one single provider, you can do the same from another language, and the more you do, the cheaper it becomes. So it's not so difficult. Consider that we are a genre, but in literature the situation is not so bad, because there are books that have been translated from many languages. It's just that science fiction has been taken from one culture, and just because probably of the development of technology and innovation, of course, driven by the US and UK, I think. But I think that this is the century of a new kind of science fiction. And I like to say, my idea is that we are moving from a sense of wonder with O to a sense of wonder with A, meaning that we're going to wander around the earth looking for new futures.
I love that. I love the wonder versus wonder.
Yeah.
I'd love
Thank
to
you.
see more stories from the African continent. And there's some people doing really interesting things in the space. Fashion designer friend of mine and artist, Sally Raby Kane in Dakar in Senegal, put together the Dakar Biennale, and she put together a science fiction inspired fashion show, and they turned the whole of downtown Dakar into like this installation piece, and it was an art party with aliens. And then it was like, okay, cool, if aliens came, what would the fashion look like? What inspiration would we take from that? And she's also made a really cool VR short film, and I'd love to see more of that kind of stuff happening. I want to know what's happening in Eritrea and Sudan, and yeah.
Okay. And in Japan, we meet the three-body program in these 2 years because the three-body program publishing was delayed in Japan for the 3 years later after the English publishing. Then we met the Chinese science fiction. Then there are many several the very working translator publishes a very good anthology, and we are very enjoying the Chinese science fiction right now. And basically in Japan, that we need to translate the stories from outside, because the Japanese English education is not so good, and not so many people cannot read the English literature on smoothly. Then we need translation. Then before many science fiction writers and started the career of the reading of the translated science fiction, but now many writers do not touch the translation. And the Chinese science fiction boom changes the game, and I'm very happy to introducing Chinese science fiction for Japanese readers right now.
Fascinating. And do you think, and this is to the panel as a whole, there are certain things that non-Anglosphere science fiction does better? Certain subtleties, or is there a different could you say that there is such a thing, a monolithic thing as world science fiction, if only in a negative to what it's not, or a characteristic of Anglosphere SF?
Well, I think we're probably better at breaking down colonialism and post-colonialism. I think we live deep inside.
I think that's probably the main part of it, and I think that, I mean, going back to Chinese science fiction, I think that Liu Cixin, you know, put it, you know, sort of really rather sort of wonderfully when he said that he felt that the Chinese experience of what it was to meet another culture was very different, you know, from the Western experience of what it was, you know, to meet another culture. And, you know, they were culturally overwhelmed, you know, with the ideas of capitalism and communism all rolled up. And it strikes me that, I mean, in a lot of, I mean, generalizing that probably, but, you know, that there is a greater awareness of cultural exchange in a lot of the stories that are read in this tome here. And I just wondered if that's something, you know, as, you know, from a sort of, certainly from a sort of a colonialist point of view, that you're not really aware of, you know, because one's own culture, you know, steamrollers all before it.
Yeah. I definitely think that there are things that we approach very differently in terms of how we see solutions to it or how we see reactions to it. I think that because of colonialism, there's a sort of expectation in Western society that aliens are most likely going to be dangerous and we have to fear them. But so many of our cultures encountered the aliens already, and whatever horrors came out of it, we assimilated and we ended up living together. So I think we don't necessarily approach the idea of alien invasions, alien life form, or even conflict, like real conflict, as something that must be solved with more conflict, more war, more confrontation, or even by an individual, which I think the idea that individualism is the answer, that the lone genius or the one great idea is going to deliver us all in our greatest time of need. I think that one of the things you could see in world science fiction is that we often talk about community and the importance of approaching things together, the importance of a team to deal with issues, and the idea that the present is not the only thing you're trying to save. Sometimes you're trying to save your past as well, because you've lost that because of colonialism, because of, you know, histories that were erased in order so that the victors could walk forward, you know, with their heads held high. And also the future, that for us, community and the survival and legacy means a great deal, you know, as much as individual survival and cultural hegemony, I think, in some cases, is not as important to us, you know, in our writing and in how we approach some things. Not saying that there's anything necessarily totally and completely unentertaining or wrong in those approaches, but it's just that we might have a different viewpoint. We might come from it at a different angle.
I think what's also interesting, I think, which is a credit to science fiction readers, is that we're used to dealing with weird concepts and alien cultures and things that don't look exactly like us. Exactly. And my friend Zukiswa Wana is a fabulous writer who's doing some really great things for African literature. But when she was shopping around her literary novel, Cape Town, Joburg, London, an agent came back to her and said, well, you know, I just don't think it's African enough. As if there's only one way of being African, as if, you know, unfortunately, there just weren't enough child soldiers. We can't compute with this cosmopolitan Africa you're showing us, where people have boyfriend problems, you know, or like urban city life problems. No, we need more child soldiers and AIDS babies, please.
Exactly what you're talking about. I had so many fears like that when I started out and decided to make some of my shorter fiction explicitly Trinidadian, and I was like, how far do I go with this? Because you're worried that people will say, oh, I can't make out the accent. Oh, I don't see anything here that screams Caribbean, you know? And I sort of decided, you know what, that this is who I am and this is where I'm coming from. This is my vision of what I see for us in the future. And I decided to just put it out there and hope for the best. I was lucky Clarksville understood what I was trying to do and didn't let the differences faze them, you know, but definitely I have had work rejected. That was where I was told, it's not quite exotic enough. It's not Caribbean enough. It doesn't hit me over the head with, you know, the region. I don't feel that. And I'm sort of like, I am from the region. I can't do better than that.
What I found out from my scouting around the world is that we've been sold a definition and one idea and one single kind of technology, which is, you know, Western centered, which is progressive centered. While going around, I found out that native innovation has basically already imagined all these things, but has been totally neglected, totally removed from the world imagination. So let's take the ziggurat from Blade Runner. They're not Los Angeles, you know, they're not Los Angeles 2019, they are Iraq. And if you take whatever technology and innovation you might think of, well, in India with the Jugaad, they already did it. So the idea of a Western progress, the idea of a Western way to the future is just one way. So when you ask me, is there something the rest of the world does better? No, we don't do nothing better. We do it differently. We just do it another way. So it's not a matter of being, you know, on a vertical axis, but it's just on a horizontal axis. We are the biodiversity of the future, and you need a biodiversity of the future if you want to be able to survive whatever black swan will, you know, happen to us, whatever will reduce the cultural value of our differences. And I think there is a big richness in these kind of books.
It's beautifully said.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And it chimes in, you know, largely with a few of the comments that were questions that we've got building up. In that, you know, we're talking about, you know, the challenges of actually getting this richness of the material really across. And I suppose we ought to ask ourselves, you know, what are the next steps, you know, that we can take to make sure, you know, that this literature is presented to the world. I mean, there are questions here about, you know, do we need to bypass publishers? You know, is the internet the way to do it? You know, the serialization platforms, you know, which are out there. Taiyo, I mean, you I believe invented your own digital serial delivery model.
Yeah. Yeah. And in Japan, you may know that in Japan that we have huge the serial novel publishing publishing service platform, the Becoming a Novelist. The name is Becoming a Novelist. Then the 500,000 no 60, yes, 60,000 600,000 writers publishes 8,000 issues every day and posting it. Then that quantity make the totalitarianism because the readers cannot find the good novel from the quality or from the theme, because every time, every hour, we see another new issues on that machine. Then the voting and the voting population have a huge power, and the many thousands of writers started to write the same theme, and they make another big power in these only these 5 years, we saw the huge booms and booming up and lose and forgotten again. And not so many, no, only few writers growing up and got succeed from that platform. The huge platform they make another totalitarianism market.
You are, of course, then reliant on the crowd, and that the sheer volume makes it sound like the world's most terrifying inbox.
Biggest slush pile in the world.
Yeah.
I do think, is it Masimba's point about, that it does feel like British and American media houses do dictate kind of the stuff that we get to see. And I don't know how to get around that. I think apart from like publishing online, but then you need to be able to drive people towards those stories. So maybe we should just embed like cool stories from different countries in NFTs, and maybe that's the way to do it. Or maybe every crypto transaction has to go through with a story.
I do have an NFT out. If anyone has $3,000 they want to spend,
You still haven't sold it.
An NFT, just so I can say that. So, yes, let's put it on the blockchain.
Yeah.
No, Nick, to be honest, the answer is really simple. Firstly, Nick, clearly we need a best of all this F2.
Exactly. That was the point I was leading up to.
If only to justify the volume 1 on this one. Otherwise, I'd have to erase them with a black marker pen. No, it's incredibly frustrating. It's also, I would point out, if you were asking about Japanese science fiction, in fact, Japanese science fiction is available in English. There's a whole imprint dedicated to Japanese science fiction. It's just no one ever bothered to buy the books. So you are faced with this indifference, and I've noticed that as well when I'm doing the World SF stuff, that people who are interested in it are not necessarily based in America. The people who are interested are people like, when Francesco found it, and the fact that people in different countries are seeing it, and we never really get that much of a response from America. They kind of have their own thing going, and that's absolutely fine. But at some point, you just have to, my writing career anyway definitely feels like it's never gotten any easier. That you're still beating against the doors and beating your head against it. And you would kind of assume that at some point they would just accept that you're not going away and just give you a, 7-10 book contract. $1 million and just say, go and do your thing. But every book is a battle. And when you come from any country that doesn't speak English, but the line, like Italy or like Israel, 50% of the books you read are translated either from English or from any other European and Asian languages. In English, the number is 3% of translations are the entire, not just for fiction, but for car manuals. So your Toyota car manual counts in those 3%. So in English, you simply do not get any novels. And so if you look at, we finally published, Polish bestsellers with The Witcher, but how many other Polish books can you point to? There's so you if you're lucky, you get one writer who breaks out from every country, maybe into English, but you don't get anything else. And when you do get, pretty much everyone ignores it, which is what I was convinced was going to happen with the three-body problem. If you ever, I told you that story, but if you ever buy the first English edition of the three-body problem, they clearly didn't think it was going to sell anything because it's got a quote from me on it somewhere, which disappeared very, very quickly when they replaced it with Barack Obama. It just goes to show they didn't think it was going to sell anything. I didn't think it was going to sell anything because none of them ever do. None of the translated books ever do until you get the one book that makes it huge. But English needs a much healthier ecosystem, and a much more, the same as every other country in the world does pretty much, that has an established system of translations and the expenses are factored in, and they're publishing, and people read more books. Well, yeah, I mean, it has challenges.
We translate from one language. That's the problem.
Yeah.
That would be, yeah.
Yeah.
Troublesome.
That's the issue, man.
I think we need champions, and I think, you know, Lavie, what you've done, and Francesco with your work, is champion like writing from around the world. And you know, and I've just put 2 links in the chat. Jeff Ryman has done the most phenomenal work, like coming to interview writers from around the African continent, starting the Nomo Awards, really trying to kind of get it out there. But again, you know, it's how do you create that kind of just momentum? How do you keep it going? How do you, you know, the problem with the Nomos is a lot of the work isn't available to read. Like, you've got to be able to buy it in Ethiopia or in Kenya or in Nigeria, and it's not available online, and you can't read the comics online. And I don't know how do we change that. That's kind of, you know, deep infrastructure stuff. But I do think having champions helps. So thank you guys for the work that you're doing.
Yes, I wanted to say the same thing. I wanted to say thank you to Nicolas, the head of Zeus, to Lavie for putting this project forward, for inviting us to be part of it.
I'm only doing it for the money.
No, because it's unbelievably important. And you know, there are some short fiction magazines out there that are trying to do their part. I don't think I would have gotten anywhere if it wasn't for Clarksville. They've published me several times now. They published the story that is in this edition, The Sun from Both Sides. And Neil has a commitment to publishing translated stories in every issue almost. And they're usually from China, you know, but he's open to the entire world. And there are a lot of magazines now that are taking that mantle on and are willing to open up to the entire world and really actually give that chance in every issue to someone. And I want to encourage those magazines like Fire and Fireside and Strange Horizons and Uncanny to just keep doing that and keep showing that it's successful, keep showing that audiences want it, keep showing that the money can be there as well. And not only does it bring in audiences and open up this closed world that is English publishing industry, but it inspires people like myself who read English, are from an English-speaking society, but did not know that you could write stuff in your own place from your own mind and have something important to say, have something useful to say. It was because magazines like Clarksville are free to read online, or because people make issues or stories free to read online after a time, that you inspire more writers to come and give up themselves, whether it's free or whether they decide to try and make a career of it, whatever. Taking those small steps and championing those little things can have really big effects.
I mean, what I'm continually struck by is how hard you as authors and as have worked as proselytizers, you know, sort of for, you know, your own stories and for the stories of, you know, of your fellow writers. And that seems to be something that's pretty unique, you know, to genre fictions, but I think, you know, more so in science fiction than in many other genres. I mean, you know, we've obviously got the convention scene that draws, you know, sort of a lot of people to various, you know, sort of points around about the globe, and that is expanding. And that's a very good thing. But, you know, I'm aware, you know, that basically, you know, all of you here today, you know, have worked very hard to proselytize, you know, your own works. I mean, Lavie's traveled the world, you know, he set up and did his Apex books on his own. He pushed, you know, sort of this. Francesco, you know, has, you know, is flying a flag in Italy for world science fiction. Taiyo created, you know, his own sort of platform for the distribution of his books. Lauren, I mean, the first time I met you, you came to my office at 8 o'clock in the morning. That's the only time I've ever met, you know, an author at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you came in and to I guess effectively interview us and to sell, you know, yourself as a novelist, and that, you know, takes, you know, sort of real gumption, I think. So, I mean, I think we are all in it, and we can make it so. And so, I think that this is just a small step on all of your shoulders, to kind of getting it right. I think that we should definitely commit to another one next year. Lavie is our series editor, and I hope that in due course that I'll be able to invite all of you to be the guest editors at some point, by the time, we're into our 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. Lavie's a series editor. There's no getting away from that. We're not going to let him off easily.
Series editor means I don't do any work, but you still have to give me like half the money.
I'm just going to send you all like the really hot South African writers.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what, that's what we want. I mean, I remember, I know that as a publisher, I know the talent's out there, but I don't always know how to get hold of it. I mean, I wanted to find Chinese science fiction, I think for, 10 years before I stumbled completely accidentally across Three Body. And that was because, it had been sold to Tor. And I heard about it from their rights director, which is the most boring way, to pick up, sort of a wonderful piece of science fiction from another country through totally traditional publishing channels. And so, let's create, the other way, and let's do this all again, in a year's time, and then again and again and again. So we've had an hour and a bit now, and so this is where we said we would we'd wind it up. Thank you very much to all of you for an hour's worth of your time. And I think that we did have people from all over the world sort of in the chat. So this is a truly international Zoom cast, if that's what you call it, to go with our international compendium. So I would just like to say thank you to all of us joining us. Let's say thank you for the team, Lauren Beukes, head of Zeus, for putting all of this together behind the scenes. She worked very hard to do this. And if the feedback from this isn't too bad, we would like to do it again with further Ad Astra podcasts. Lavie's going to say something.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you. Don't forget, we're also launching the anthology in June in the States. So we've got a whole bunch of events coming up for that, which is super exciting. So we'll have an American Zoom launch, and we'll have some translators, a panel with translators. So we're not going anywhere anytime soon. But just for me personally, I just want to say thank you so much to all of you for making my dream come true, really, with this book. And for being in it, and for getting up at 3 in the morning in some cases. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and go buy the book.
Yeah,
I've already got it, but
bye bye.
Right, not you, everybody else.
Ciao tutti.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great evening.